Hi, I'm Nainita Desai, and I'm the composer of Zao.
Hi, I'm Rob Brown. I am the lead audio designer on Zao. The first thing that drew me to this project was the team. I got to know the team very quickly when I joined, but before that, it was a case of kind of seeing who Surgent were, learning about Abu, learning about what he wanted from a game development studio. And immediately I thought that culture is actually quite rare in the industry these days. It was a very high empathy team. And for me, that excited me a lot, especially to come in fresh. There was no audio department. So that was an exciting opportunity as well. And then when you get into the project and you see what we got the opportunity to work on, that was super exciting because that is something, again, you don't see a lot of in the industry. You don't see a lot of these stories being told.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was kind of like the same.
Absolutely, yeah. It's very, very similar for me. When I was approached, I was so excited. I mean, Abu's work, amazing work, had been on my radar for a long time. And then when I heard that he had set up this new studio, I thought, gosh, this is going to be interesting. Yeah. And then, the ethos and the concept and the principles behind the studio was very attractive to me. It's really rare in in this industry. And then, of course, the creative potential was really exciting. I thought, I've not seen anything done like this before. And I felt, and for me, whenever I work on a project, I want to be inspired and I want to feel that I can contribute something and put my stamp on it and work within the framework of the expectations of the team and the game. And I thought there was something really fresh and original and different that could be said with this game and make its mark within the industry.
I definitely think that was a big thing for us as an audio team as well. Like bringing you on, a lot of the time you'll get very strict kind of boundaries set for your work to come in and be like, okay, can you knock out A, B, and C, please? But having you on the team and having already a working relationship a bit with Abu beforehand and coming in, it was very much just a case of trust. I immediately had the utmost trust in our working relationship with the music. I just knew that with a little direction from me is all you needed, and then you could just spread your wings and just make the music that we needed. You had a lot of creative freedom in that sense, I feel like, and that's, I think, the area that you excel in, is not hemming you in, not clipping your wings, just giving you the right amount of aim and then setting you off. And I think, yeah.
But I'm really used to, with most of my experiences working in the film and TV industry, so I'm used to really tight deadlines and working within a strong brief and a framework and structure. And so here I love working within barriers, but then to be given that creative freedom was really refreshing for me as well.
Yeah. The role of music and sound in a interactive experience like Zao is such a big topic. It's such a broad concept. But I think you can kind of narrow it down. For me, I can narrow it down quite quickly to a few things. And that was something I worked a lot on with yourself, with the audio team, is making sure that when we're working on this project, we focused on these core seeds. Otherwise, you can get lost in a jungle. So for us, the authenticity, I know we talked a lot about authenticity and the cultural aspect of where Zao as a project is born. We wanted to be as authentic as we could to that. So a lot of that revolved around the music that you wrote. A lot of that revolved around the sound design that we created for a lot of the aspects of Zao outside of the music. Looking at a lot of real world examples to pull from that to have a sort of truth to a lot of our sound design, and then amplifying it. So that role of sound design and music for me in this game, a lot of that, it ties to that culture, ties to that truth. But I know emotion's another huge one that we've talked about.
Yeah. In all my projects, what fires me is authenticity and being true to the story, true to the heart of what the project is really about. And you've hit the nail on the head for me, authenticity. Musically, I always regard music is the hidden character in a project, whatever it is. You're digging beneath the surface. So what is this game really about? And so in terms of the role of the music within the game, in the early stages, in the early sort of 5-6 months of my involvement in the game, I was very much inspired by, I'm very visually inspired. So I was given a lot of mood boards, visual guides. The research that went into the game was phenomenal. So, we're looking at, sort of digging down, drilling down, looking at influences from Africa, covering the whole rich African diaspora. And looking at different sections of the game, and then being inspired and trying to create and compartmentalize these different influences, and expressing that through the music as well, and all the different levels in the game. So music has this subconscious role that you don't really realize as a gamer, and how it's affecting you emotionally, and the characters and the storytelling within Zao is really quite deep and brave, and the way that it confronts grown-up issues that people can slightly shy away from confronting. So that was a huge part in terms of the musical role of the game.
I think you touched on something super interesting about that unseen character when we talk about sound and music in game. And I think, especially when we talk about telling a story, this whole project has been about telling a story. We have a very interesting opportunity working within the sound and the music for the project to not only choose our times to support the narrative that's going on and to really bring the story to life, but we've also got ways to subtly tell a parallel story or reinforcing a parallel story. We've got a lot of examples in our music and in our sound design where we're re-emphasizing the idea that this is a story being told through a book. We've got this dual protagonist set up where we've got this Afro-future setting. So we bleed a lot of those lines together. We did a lot of that with our music, with a lot of the tracks we did for Bosses. Yeah. Borrowed a lot from that. That was very fun to be able to skirt that balance between this high fantasy story told through a father's storybook to his child, at the same time as this child's imagination taking over and trying to write his story through it too. So I find that was a great opportunity for us as storytellers to try and have a little bit of creativity in the way we apply our disciplines, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think, for me, in terms of musical palette, and trying to convey, to try how to express those different aspects of a game. You've got those big conversations we had about Afrofuturism, and that was and how would we express that musically? So that was it was quite futuristic, using electronics and synthesizers, but then the emotional heart is best conveyed through the use of the orchestra. Getting emotion across. So lots of strings, and then brass, with which was but used in a way that was sympathetic with African music. And then of course the third strand is Bantu mythology, and that excites me a lot because of my background in world music. I love diving deep into researching, sort of deconstructing ethnicity musically, looking at influences from all over the world, and then deconstructing them and then reconstructing them in a unique way. So we're using a lot of diving into using African music within Afrofuturism and orchestral music. So the sort of the apexes of those of that triangle then come together to different varying degrees within the realms of the game, depending on where we are in the story.
Yeah, we had a great art team who did loads of research into making sure that each of the locations within the game not only offered up like a lot of exciting exploration or representing these kind of pillars of grief as we see they're reflected in a lot of these levels, but it also gave us opportunity within the music and the sound design to tap into those roots. Again, it ties back to the authenticity we talked about. When we look up, say we look at Kuruka Village or something like that, we can pull that apart and say like, okay, well, we know the genetic DNA of this location, and we can use that to inform our music for that location. And I know that was a big thing for you when we talked about doing the village music, was where is this culture? Like, where does this come from? Like, we have a history in game, but we also have a DNA to the real world as well. We did a lot of that in our ambience work as well. We looked at real world locations within parts of sort of sub-Saharan Africa, where we looked at, okay, this is a fictional jungle, but what's its DNA? Where does it come from? Where how is it informed from like the art team? So we pulled a lot of stuff from wildlife recordings to bring that place to a believable spot, and then elevating it to bring that fantasy edge that so much of Kenzera is like built upon.
Yeah, I think the woodlands were connected to East Africa, weren't they?
That's right. Yeah.
Ethiopia.
That's right.
With the tree canopies, and you're in the treetops, and we had to create this sense of unease and tension and mystery as you're exploring that area. And so that was quite an influence. And musically, I was taking a leaf out of Kenyan tribes like the Masai Mara.
Yeah.
And then we touched upon the plainlands a little bit, which was the Zulu in South Africa, which is quite sentimental, reflective, I think, the music. And then, going across to West Africa, which was it the Deadlands or the Highlands? I can't remember.
So West Africa was definitely more of our Deadlands.
The Yoruba tribe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which was, I remember the combat track for that had to be sort of restrained rage.
That was it. Yeah. I think you definitely nailed that.
Anger and aggression within the music.
No, I remember working with the team on the ambience for you touched on woodlands, and we talked about the Maasai tribe, and I remember looking up the geographical patterns of the tribes and like where they exist, and what about the wetlands within those areas. So we started pulling from these different, like, okay, so what's the ecology like in these places? So we'd look up the ecology of these wetlands within, again, tying it to that authentic real world application, but then elevating it. So yes, okay, we pulled in a lot of like insect beds and cicadas, but it's like, okay, how do we push that? So we're putting it through resynthesis. We're applying different processing to just make it feel like believable enough that it makes sense, but then elevating it a bit further just to give it that fantastical edge, as if it's a child reading a child's storybook.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And then that translated across obviously into the music, and trying to be authentic and specific to those areas, like the nyatiti is an amazing instrument that was played in East Africa, using the foot stomps and the shouts of the tribes of the Masai Mara, and then the Zulu singing of South Africa, and you've got these beautiful, amazing choral harmonies. The voices come together. So we have a choir that's an authentic African choir, and black voices that are going to be within the score, and then of course to West Africa, which is one of my favorite regions in Africa, looking at the music of Nigeria and the historical influences there, like the kora is this beautiful African harp that's used a lot. So we're covering all sorts of different instruments. The talking drum, which is amazing sound, and the djembe, and lots of different African percussion, lots of unusual rhythms as well, lots of different beats, which one of the big challenges was writing the boss fights.
Yeah, those were very challenging things to sort of tackle as a team, both from the sound design and the music side. But I think I'm very proud of the work that we did on that. I think it was a big technical challenge for us. It was a lot of music. Yeah. The way we structured it, the way you wrote it, gave us a lot of room to maneuver. But it's definitely a big shift from your typical linear piece of music. We had to break that down in a way that really sort of lent itself to the dynamism of the fight. I think the hardest musical challenge in the game was writing the boss fights. Because I'm not coming from film and TV, I'm not used to writing music that's over 4 minutes long. And so trying to maintain that level of intensity, but also inject variety, keep the momentum going, keep it fresh and engaging for the player. Obviously, that's helped a lot by the modularity of the music and the stems and the layers and so on. But exploring, but also writing several boss fights and several combat tracks, trying to keep each one distinct and make them different, and keep pushing that level up. And
yeah, just making it. I mean, I get bored very quickly as a composer, so for me, it's important to maintain that engagement for me.
Yeah.
Let alone the player. So that was a fun challenge.
It was great. I think, like I say, I'm very proud of the work that we did on that. I think, like you touched on the modularity, but I think the main thing really is the personality that we talked about in the bosses, giving them their personality. I think, we had such a strong support with the art direction for the bosses, the narrative justification for the bosses as to what they represent and who they are. I know we talked a lot about each boss and what they represent in terms of Zhao's journey with grief. And I think that really helped us hone in on, okay, yes, we're facing this monstrosity and it's a difficult challenge for Zhao, but like, who is this? What is this? Like, where does this come from? What does this mean for Zhao? What is he trying to do here? Yes, he's fighting this boss, but is he trying to conquer just this thing for the sake of it? Or is he trying to conquer this part of anxiety or rage, these parts of grief that we all have to deal with? And it's lent itself greatly to our design, I think, just being able to tap into that. Yeah.
Nailing that main theme was the big one, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think in terms of personality in our game, I think a lot of that comes through in the main theme. I think I remember having long conversations with Abu about, where he foresaw that going. And we talked a lot about that ancestral, spiritual history that Zhao has and how that bleeds over and is mirrored and reflected in Zuberi, our Afrofuture protagonist.
Yeah, I remember wanting to avoid writing the main theme for a while. Yeah. I think sometimes, when you tackle a project, you'll go straight for the jugular and go for the main theme first because everything branches off that in a project. And here, it had to encapsulate so much within the game that we felt, well, why didn't we get a few other areas of music under our belt? And then we came to the main theme. Mm-hmm. And I think once that was unlocked, it was like Pandora's box opened in a good way.
Definitely.
And using a certain sound, using an instrument, because I remember, your briefs were fantastic, and I've so enjoyed working with you on the game over the last year. We'd have these long,
sometimes
evolving Zoom conversations over Zoom,
Yeah.
hours long, going through the brief, and I like to listen to people talk and use lots of words because I can then filter that and distill it down to what is this really about, sort of unlocking that key. I think with the main theme, I remember, I think you and Abu was saying that you didn't want to focus on grief and didn't want it to be melancholic, but it had to have a feeling of longing, this ancestral longing, and and that was a key thing. So we used the cello, which was I'd been listening into researching African music, and that sound encapsulated Zhao.
Definitely, yeah,
using the human voice, and we do use the human voice in the game at key moments, which is just this warm, enveloping, wonderful sound. It's so versatile, the use of the human voice, because you can have a wonderful choir inspired by Zulu voices, South African choirs, and then you've got solo male and female voices as well that represent different aspects.
That was one of my favorite things, I think, as well, was the use of voice that we had throughout, not just the music, but within the sound design as well, because this whole story we're telling revolves around this storybook. It's a story that a father would read to his son at bedtime, and it echoes and reflects the culture and traditions. We talk about Bantu mythology, we talk about storytelling, it's all oral. So using the voice a lot, I felt like really, really hammered a lot of that home, even just in subtle ways. We used the choir, we used voice a lot in our sound design as well, in subtle ways, just to reinforce it. In fact, the griot echoes, storytellers by nature, we used voice a lot in that design as well, just to subtly reinforce the idea that this is all told. It's an oral tradition. It's passed on from generation to generation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how music works as well. It's not notated. It's not written down. In African music, you use your ears all the time and you're improvising. And those, certainly in West African musical traditions, it's brought down generation to generation. Yeah.
There's so many exciting moments in the game that I'm looking forward to see players experience. But I think one of them might fly under the radar a bit, and I think that's the combat trials that we have in the game. And it's one of my favorite things that we worked on together, because we touched on this before, but the duality and the bleeding of lines between the traditional and the futuristic. And I think that's something that, after talking to you about, I knew you latched onto straight away. And the music in those encounters, I think, it's always, as soon as I heard it, it blew my socks off, because we took what we had established already a lot in the exploration with the villages and the biomes. And then when we reached this part of the story where it's not necessarily tied to the critical path, but that's great, because then it lends a space for Zuberi, our protagonist in the Afrofuture, to take over. And that's where we inject more of his personality. And we did a lot of that in the audio design for the encounters, but we also did a lot of that in the music, introducing the synthesis stuff more. I think bringing that to the front was super exciting. And it's a bit of a pivot from what the player will have been experiencing until then. And it's subtly pushing that Zuberi narrative forward. I don't know how you found writing the music for those encounters.
It was tough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved, the use of synth in a different way, in a very gritty, edgy, visceral way.
Very.
But making that work harmoniously with the tribal aspects of the music.
Not something often done, but I think I think you've smashed it. I'm very, very proud of the work that we did on those encounters.
I can't wait to share that with the world.
Yeah. Like, a lot of people assume that audio is kind of drag and drop. And I think a lot of people might be surprised the amount of work that went on behind the scenes with the audio team on creating fresh but authentic source for so much of our sound design. And we use a lot of the music as inspiration as well.
Did you have any live, did you do live recordings?
We did, we did some, what we could, as we all worked from home, we had to sort of make do with what we had.
Yeah.
And the team working on this were outstanding. We had a lot of very cool ideas come in through experimentation. This is something that we tried a lot of. So a great example is one of our interactions with the bounce pad that we have in the game is heavily influenced by the music that you write. So we have like djembe as a part of the identity of something like this. It ties into the cultural aspects, of course, ties into the music, but then also reinforces the gameplay. So that came from the getting everything from scratch. That came from the experimentation of going away, recording stuff, going away, grabbing what we can around our homes, and making what we think will really help the game tell that story. So I don't think many people will perhaps think that would be the case, but it's a testament to the folks that worked on this and the team. They did a great job.
An amazing team effort.
Yeah,
isn't it?
exactly. Yeah.
I was introduced to Abu, and I love his enthusiasm.
It's a big one. Yeah, he's so enthusiastic.
And his passion, and it finds its way into you. It translates so well, and just his energy is infectious.
Absolutely.
And I love listening to him speak. And he's so ambitious. He has so many ideas, and he's so articulate as well, that it fires up all sorts of imaginative neurons in my brain when, I'm inspired by that. So, in the early stages, and I was involved on the game almost from the very beginning, I think. There was a lot of experimentation, a lot of discussions. I, was soaking up a lot of, the script and the narrative and to see how the story shaped and changed direction many times. So, and then eventually the story found its home. And settle down, and that's those early stages are very sort of chaotic and in a good way, because the whole team, was sort of evolving in a very organic way, and so I think the way that the story has landed now is very finely tuned. It's focused, and and the similar sort of thing happened with the music. Going on that journey, having all those discussions, soaking up all the mood boards, seeing how the villages would be displayed visually, and having little musical instruments in the artwork.
That's right, yeah.
So that was inspiring.
Yeah.
And then you came on board.
That's right.
and helped fine-tune and hone down Abu's very enthusiastic descriptions, and filter that down through into musical language as well. So that was a really we found a system and a rhythm in our process.
That was a
really
big
well.
thing for me. Yeah, I think coming in, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the things that you mentioned, is the enthusiasm, that energy. That was a big thing that hooked me on the project when I first started, when I came on board. And Abu has such a strong vision. Like, music is such a big part of Abu's identity.
It's a big driving force for him.
Huge. Yeah. So coming on board and having somebody in his position with a very strong sense of identity and again, that sort of musical DNA, he had that set. I remember him sending me playlist upon playlist of music, just being like, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm at. I'm like, this is great. This is, I know where you're at mentally now. And my job was then to sort of bridge that gap between Abu's tsunami of energy and enthusiasm, and then channel that into something tangible that you and I could work towards and support. And I think that was a very exciting.
Yeah. And he's great at the overall picture. But then I remember, he'd fine tune and zone in on forensically on little details as well.
Yeah. So many folk have helped get audio to where it was for this project. The art team we've touched on before, but the art that we had in the game, from the mood boards, a lot of the sort of pre-production that went into the world of Kenzera. You come into a big project like this with a fresh, whole new world to build on, and on top of that, another world running parallel. The only way we can really know what's going on and which direction we take the audio and the music is heavily inspired by the artistic direction. So I think the art team were such a boon for us as creatives to work alongside. And in the same breath, you have to talk about the story. I know that was a big thing for you with the narrative.
I mean, I'm very visually inspired.
Which was huge. We got a lot of support from the animation and VFX team. They were constantly sending us stuff for you to work to score to.
And I had all the cutscenes as well.
Yeah, which was such a great tool for us.
Yeah. And for me, it was refreshing to have the odd visual to work to as well.
That's it,
I mean, I did see you were sending me gameplay videos. So, that was a huge help to see. Sometimes you're working in quite an abstract way. And even though, I had a lot of, huge written briefs and inspiration, just to see screenshots of the game, to see the characters fleshed out.
Like context.
To give it that narrative context, the visual context as well. Moving images.
It goes a long way.
It goes a long way.
Especially when we have these big technical challenges of the boss fights.
Yeah.
And piecing that together. I know some of the boss fights are quite complicated in terms of their structure. When we're talking about the cutscenes and coming in and out of gameplay. And it was super important for us, for you and I, to be able to look at it objectively with a visual and say, like, it'd be beautiful to have this piece of music come in here for this piece of action. So that the animation team just smashed it in that regard. They supported us strongly. Huge part of the sound of our game is the voice actors, bringing the story to life. It's quite ambitious for a project of this size and scale to go fully voiced, and I think it pays off. We had such amazing talent come in and help us out, bringing these characters to life, really embodying these personalities. They also brought a lot of life to our creatures, our monsters, our bosses. Having that as a sort of core piece of identity for these larger-than-life entities, having that grounded in a performance, a real performance of a human being with real emotion, goes such a long way in bringing that that character or that entity to life.
And making the characters credible and three-dimensional. It's the performance is all in the voice, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And we were lucky because Abu played such a strong role in that, you know, having such a wealth of experience in voice acting and being able to direct the crew, get the best out of them, and also just being on board to voice Zhao, of course, as well, and bring that character to life. That was super exciting. So yeah, it was good.